don't do it like that. It works, but what it does here is a simple string replace. So you open up a big SQL injection door here, because Apex at first replaces this part here, and then runs the command dynamic SQL. So if your user enters something bad, like not only a name or something like that, but then semicolon drop database, it will just run this code. Not true. Remember, when it's about SQL, anywhere SQL or pure SQL inside of Apex, always use the column stuff. Never use the other stuff. So very simple. Blah blah blah. Exactly. It has to look something like that. Okay. Universal theme, awesome, beautiful. It comes with this nice menu. But did you know you can simply switch it to not be on the side but on the top? And then it's like this. Wow. Nobody uses that, right? But you should consider if you don't have too many menu items, the top theme could actually work out pretty. So, theme ruler. Luckily, everyone knows about it. Use it more and more. It has a lot of options. Click this one to get more things in here, and you can tweak your layout to your company standards or personal preferences, like this beautiful beast here. Yep. So that brings us into live template options. Might know about it or might not. There's that quick edit since I think Apex 5-ish, something like that. If you hit quick edit and you hover somewhere on your page, regions, buttons, whatever will be highlighted. And then live edit gives you this little wrench. So if you hit the wrench, you can change template options, little settings, and immediately see how the layout changes. So you can, remove some body padding and you immediately see how much nicer you think it gets. Very convenient. It also works on everything that has template options. Could be buttons, regions, items, and so on. Sometimes it gets a bit frickly to actually hit the thing, but it's there. So session sharing. You can see those tips are all over the place in random order. What's session sharing? Session sharing is if you have multiple applications working together and share the session. So user doesn't have to log in into each application. It's pretty much like the Apex application builder. If you log on to an Apex workspace, that's application 4550. Then you go into the actual application builder, that's application 4000, and so on. Every piece in Apex has a different app ID, and then you can do the same, which brings you, you can, instead of having one huge app, you could have multiple smaller applications, and that way you could then, roll out tiny changes more easily. So, to activate session sharing, go to the authentication scheme, and it has a setting, session sharing, and the default is no. There is no sharing, but you could switch it to, hey, share it with other applications in the same workspace that have the same setting. Or, and that's what it looked like before, so this was always possible, you can provide a cookie name, and every app using the same cookie name will share this session. Great stuff. Error handling function in place for years and hardly ever used. So on application level, you can define an error handling function. It's a PL/SQL function, and every time there is some exception in Apex, this function will get invoked, and in there you can do whatever you want. You can log the error, you can change the error messages, you can, raise something else. There's everything you can do. And there's a really good sample function provided in the example database app or something like that. There's also good help text. Use it, it gives you a single place to control how error handling works in your app. Yeah, great example, it's well documented, you can see what you can do, there's some utility functions in there, so you can really tweak all the things there. So, but if it's just about having a different message for 1403 no data found, then there's a simpler trick. You can do it in the error handling function, but you could also you could use a simple text message, shared components text message. It has to follow a certain naming pattern, but then you can simply by defining the text message change what's here. Right, so that's the default. One's from the page submission thing, and the other one's an Ajax call. And once we introduce the text message, and that's the name for the text message, apex.error. SQL code, watch out, it's not always the same as the exception number. And then you can enter any text you want. It's going to look so much nicer. Yeah, like that. Simple, easy, and effective. Oh, this text. I don't know why this was invented. I'm pretty sure nobody ever uses that. There is a substitution variable that gives you the current date in exactly that format. You can't change the format mask, that's it. Take it or leave it. Carsten, any insights?
No special insights like that. I think that was needed and that was implemented right.
Okay, yeah. So that brings us to, if you use substitutions, since a few versions, you can control how it's put out, because it could be, security and all that. So instead of just specifying, hey, that's my item, put in the text, you could say, well, exclamation mark raw, so give me the value, the exact same value, because Apex is a little bit intelligent. In some places, it automatically escapes the session state. But using that, you can tell it, hey, give me what's there. Or, please escape it to be used in HTML code. Please escape it to be used in JavaScript code, and so on. So that lets it just control security and escaping a bit more. Yeah, text messages, we had one before. Text messages were invented to have the ability to translate text and have a translatable text to be used in code. So there's the pure SQL API, Apex lang message, you specify the message name and it returns the defined text, right? Depending on the current language of your application. That's pretty neat. It's there since forever. What's new is there is a substitution syntax now, and that makes it so much easier to be used inside of Apex. So let's say you want an item label to be dynamic, then you could use this in the item label, and the current value of the text message will be replaced there. And you can also control, hey, give it to me in German, no matter which language is active at the moment. That's the thing. Ooh, database links. Who uses database links? Yeah. Any problems or everything fine? Okay, so there was this client calling, and they told me, oh, suddenly all the apps are slow. And the usual question is, hey, what did it change? Nothing, of course, right? So we were debugging that. We were looking at network traces. Turned out that in debug there is certain commands in debug output that are really slow, like auto session set NNS, whatever, took 2 seconds. Turned out they had all their databases in Vienna, but then moved one of those databases to a remote computing center somewhere in Germany. and it wasn't very well connected. So all the apps were running local. They had a single application using database links to that remote database. And over time, the whole connection pool of ports got polluted by open database links. So even the applications not using a database link were using a session that had an open database link. And Apex does a lot of alter session commands in the beginning. And once you do that and you have an open database link, it's executed for the local database and the remote one. So we simply told them, hey, do this, close the database link, and everything was fine again. Okay? Linking in your application, so you want to open a certain page and there's an interactive report, and you want to make sure that there's a specific report setting displayed. Then you can specify that actually in the URL. So let's say you provided 5 different report views for your interactive report, then you can link to one particular view. Yeah. Of course, if you have more than one IR on a page, then you maybe need to specify which of those interactive reports you're actually referring to. Cool. You can also set filters in the URL. So like passing values for page items, you can pass a value for an interactive report column alias, and then name is filtered to John. Very convenient. It gets a bit more complicated if you have to specify the interactive report. You can also switch the operator. The default is equal, but you could say less than, greater than, like, whatever. Very, very nice. Oh, shortcuts. It's not the Apex feature because I think nobody uses that. This is more informational. It's the only URL you ever need. It's apex.oracle.com/shortcuts. It links you to a list of other shortcuts. So it's the easiest place to find your Apex documentation in a particular version, for example. Or, I don't know, you get a list of all the blogs and so on. Very nice collection there. And don't worry, you get the slides. Yeah, there's a lot in it. And the good thing is, if you think there's something missing, just send a tweet to the Apex team, they edit. It works great. Spotlights, that's the new search in Apex, and it's really powerful depending where you are and you invoke Spotlight. It gives you a couple options here, right? You could say, well, search all applications or the whole workspace, also include some workspace settings and so on. If you're inside an application already, it defaults to, hey, search this app, or searching all other apps and so on. It's actually quite nice. If you enter a number, it defaults to, hey, jump to this page. So that allows you to very quickly navigate the application window. There's a whole thing to search. You could not only enter a page ID, you can also enter application ID, column, page ID, and then you jump to that page in this app. So if you have to go from one app to another, this is the quickest way to go there. Instead of a column, you could also use a dash. So jump to application 169, page 1. Or if you provide an S, you jump to the shared components of this app. Beautiful. Okay, so developing applications means a lot of bugs, and bugs mean you need to debug stuff. So Apex has this wonderful debug thing, which actually is logging, it's not debugging. You can't set breakpoints or anything. It just logs whatever it does. And you can control, how much is being logged. So level 4, that's the default. If you just switch debug to yes, turn it on, then it defaults to an info level. But you could crank it up until level 9, which is Apex Engine Trace, and that provides a ton of information. Very interesting to look into that. So you can activate debug by simply putting yes in the URL, or you control it and then say, well, level whatever X. 1 would be just errors, and 9 would be log everything that's there. Yeah, so it looks something like that. You could also turn on debug in your code, or, and that's kind of new, you can turn on debug for some other session. That's the real deal, that's what you need. If some user calls you up and tells you, hey, it doesn't work, before you explain him how to enter yes in the URL somewhere, you could tell him, hey, give me your session ID, and I turn it on for you. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Remote debugging. Instead of yes or level, you could also put in the keyword remote in here. Anyone ever use that? Carsten?
Personally, never.
Okay, what it does is it tells the database that you want to debug some SQL code. So what you have to do is open SQL Developer, go to your function, procedure, package, whatever, compile for debug, set a breakpoint, activate in Apex the remote thing URL, and this one pops up and asks you for impossible stuff. It asks you which port. And you know which port? I'm Apex. So that's the database PL/SQL debugging facility, which requires the database to open up a back connection to your client. And so the database is actually going through port 4000 to your client machine. It's impossible to set up in most companies because of firewalls. So it's a fun fact at the moment. Native condition types, you probably know that if you have any server-side condition, you can pick from a very long list, or you just enter PL/SQL code. It works the same, but it actually has a performance dependency. PL/SQL code is always executed dynamically. DBMS SQL parse, bind, execute, whatever. So that it's a bit slower than using a declarative type, because that's already built into Apex's code. They don't need to run. I'm not a real they don't need to run dynamic SQL code. I know it's tiny, it's just a tiny cost, but if you have a lot of conditions, it can sum up a little bit. Yeah. So if possible, try this. Yeah, makes it better. Oh, that's I love it when I go to visit some clients and they show me their Apex app and log on to application builder. It often looks like that, right? And they have 200 apps in their workspace and it's all just icons. Nobody cares about what to do there, but actually, and this is what we tell our users, hey, we give you this beautiful interactive report, so you can customize that. You can show columns you want to see, you can switch to list view, and that's what you could do there, right? If you go to the actions, add columns, there's like a ton of extra columns in there, which you should look at. So for example, show me the application alias, or hey, which language is this one running in? Some security settings, so that could be quite interesting, depending on your needs. So personalize it, and then actions, report, save this view, and you have it every time. It's really consistent. So you can use grouping and control breaks and whatever you want, whatever you need. Just do it. Ah, yeah, yeah. Good, user preferences. This is old, it's just a simple way to store a value for a setting. It's like a key value store. A setting has a name and a value, and you have different methods to set it. So there is this process type, for example. The process type is user preferences, and you can set you can read. You can set the preference to a value of an item. Right? Let the user choose his favorite color. So now you can then store for that user that his preference is to have blue color. You can then, or you use a SQL API to set the preference, which is probably a bit more obvious. You can then use another API to read the value. So next time he logs on, you grab the preference and you know what his preference is. It's also available as item source, right? You could define an item and say, well, this item is not based on a database column. Its value is fetched from a user preference. Of course, you could store user preferences in your own tables, but that's available for free. The only thing that's missing is a view, Carsten. There is no view yet.
There is no view yet. Right.
You have full access to
Let
tables,
me
but we
just-
don't
let me
do that,
just-
right?
Let me just check something out.
Good. 22, we need to speed up a bit. Collections. Apex collections are a great way to store data temporarily, right? So you can store a single record in there. You could also store a lot of data in there. We sometimes use collections for performance workarounds. Let's say you have an interactive report, and this report is based on a really complex query. So it takes a very long time to load. And then users go off and change the sorting or do some filters, whatever, and always this big statement is executed, and it takes forever. Instead, you could just read the result set of that big query into a collection at page load, and then base this report on the collection. So that's usually then a bit faster than having it based on a really complex query. So the user would then many filters or changes sorting, whatever, this would actually be based on the collection. So it's as simple as that, as create a new collection if it doesn't exist. We call it demo customers, and grab all the values from this query, and then they are in this collection. Very simple. Then go to your report and simply query this collections table, collections view. Of course, this collections view has very generic columns like C001 to up to C050, and it has some number and some date columns if you want to use them. But that's a really nice way to get some temporary data to be used in the report. That's an old problem. It used to be an old problem. If you work with collections and you go to SQL Developer and you do this, you don't see anything, of course, because your SQL Developer is not connected to your Apex session. And this collections view is bound to an Apex session, of course, otherwise it would be security insecure probably. So what you can do now is you can use the new API, Apex Session Attach, and hook into your currently running Apex session, and then you can query the Apex collection. That's nice. Of course, this works only if you're connected as your parsing schema user to the database. Yeah. What's also new, there's a new API to create a session. So if you want to use some fancy Apex stuff in a database job, you know, like using a collection requires an Apex session. So you could just create a dummy session for your database job, and then you can use all the Apex APIs. So, for example, a session, create me a session for this app, this page, that's my user. And immediately you have access to some general Apex substitution things, or you could use the Apex Mail API, which is quite nice in job. Good. Global application items. So there's application items, and you usually use it to store just, it's like a global variable, right? When you now have some applications working together sharing a session, you want to have like access to this global variable everywhere, right? This works only if you define your application items in all the applications and set their scope to global. I don't know why they don't do it automatically. There might be a reason. Unless the scope is global, it won't be propagated to other applications. But if all the apps involved have the same global application item with the scope global, then the value is automatically passed to all apps. Yeah. Compatibility mode. This is just something you need to take care of when upgrading Apex. Apex 19.2 comes out, you upgrade your instance, or DBA upgrades your instance, then you have to go into your application and change this compatibility mode setting. Unless you change that, your app is still running in a legacy mode, which might give you, different behavior, or not. You might not be able to use the latest features because your compatibility mode is still old. Why is it there? Well, because sometimes they change behavior of the Apex engine, and they don't want your apps to break if you rely on that old thing. In the release notes, there's a very long chapter about changed behavior stuff and what the compatibility mode changes are. So you gotta read that, check your app if it's still everything alright, then you can change that. This is just one of the tasks you have to do when upgrading Apex. Go to your apps and fix that. Yeah, so you can see there's a few compatibility modes. They are only introduced if they actually change behavior. Yeah, and it could be tiny stuff like 19.1, the rich text editor now enforces validation of the max length item. So it probably won't break anything, but they wanted to make sure that nobody's having weird things going on. That brings us to the application upgrade wizard. Again, same scenario. You upgrade Apex, then go to your application and run the upgrade application wizard. It will give you a list of things that are new or could be used now. Could be tiny stuff like, hey, your interactive reports do not use safe public reports, so you could invoke that. Or the new form region, hey, Apex detects you have the old default forms in your app, and you could upgrade to the new form region type. So you click on the number here, it gives you a list of, hey, this old form region is used on those pages. check the boxes and hit upgrade if you're there. But whatever Apex does here, you need to test. So if you have very complicated forms, go easy on that. All right, view debug, we started debug before. There's a number of ways how to look at debug, and the simplest one is developer toolbar, hit the view debug thing. Then it pops up this nice thing. It shows you an interactive report, and look at that, preset filters. That's good. And this is done exactly as we said before in the URL. This simply has the values for the current app and page ID. Anyway, you got a list of your debug sessions, and then you can drill in and look at the details. One other way to see debug is in your application utilities, debug messages. It pops up the same view, basically. Or, and that's good, you can query this. And this is good because you can run this on your production database and see if there are any debug entries in here, because if Apex hits a unhandled exception, it will log a debug entry. So you could see, hey, is there something going on my production database? Did we hit any unreported and unhandled exceptions? Because you would see the entries in here. So we saw already some Apex dictionary views, and there is a view for everything except text messages, which Karsten's working on right now. So you can see a list of the Apex views, again, in your app, under utilities, boom, Apex Application Express views, and it gives you a list of all the views that are there. So if you want to know, hey, what's the name of the view to list me all buttons on the page, then you will find it in here. So since Apex is metadata driven, everything is accessible. Everything is stored in tables, and those views give us access to the content. There is even an Apex dictionary view, that's actually a table, which contains information about all the other Apex views and a description of what each column means and so on. Quite nice. Oh, yeah. So the session pop-up, again important when we do some debugging and when we try to find out what's going on. Typical example could be you have a report here and there's a filter item, so that should filter this report. Your button runs a dynamic action which does a refresh of the report. But it probably happened to you before that it doesn't really work, so that value is not being used, although it's in the query here, right? So the first step could be you hit the session pop-up and you can look at the session state. So this is what the database knows, because there's always that gap between what's on your screen and what's in the database. Apex, runs in the browser, and if you want new values to be used in the database, you actually need to pass them along, right? So using the session pop-up, you can look at the session state of all items in your application. It's quite nice, so you can make sure, hey, is the value there or not? If it's not there, 99.9% page items to submit is missing. Apex URL, well, that's outdated now. The new beautiful URLs are coming. But anyway, until we are running 21 advanced URLs, we need to know what's in there. And that's the easy part, that's your server, right? That's boards. Funny thing, you can rename RDS to whatever you want. It could, so it doesn't have to be words. And it might be one or two words. So if your RDS is configured to serve multiple databases, and there would be ords / db1, db2, or whatever you name them. Okay. Everything that ords does in the end is actually running a database connection pool and then executing PL/SQL procedures. And that's exactly what Apex is. F is a procedure. That's a procedure that Apex provides. And this procedure F has one argument that's called P. And that gets like everything behind it passed in as a string. This happens when database developers start creating web applications. But they fix it now. So YF, internally Apex used to be called flows. So flow and parameter. Okay, so in there, the first thing is the application ID. You know, it has to be unique. It's number. It could be big. Or you can use an alias instead of that. So you can define your application and application alias and use it here. Same goes for the page ID. Number, so you could make it really big again if you want. Or you use, and you can also use a page alias. The Apex session ID, you could also set it to 0. If you have public pages only, then you can use session 0, which just means it's a public session. Internally, you still have a different session ID, but you don't have to show it. Okay, in here, the empty thing, that's the request keyword. I got 5 extra minutes.
You have another 5 minutes.
Oh, excellent. Okay, the request keyword, it doesn't have any meaning.
I think I will also claim.
It simply means you can use it in conditions, and that way you have like 2 different modes of your page to work. So when you run your page, you could pass, I don't know, customer in here, and the page knows that it runs in customer mode now, or you pass, I don't know, bank or whatever. It really has no meaning. So debug thingo, we had that before. That's actually quite interesting. You can pass not only page IDs to make sure all the fields are cleared on that page, but you can also pass stuff like reset interactive report to make sure that all filters that might have been set when the user visited the page before are cleared. That's quite nice. Oh yeah, you all know that, right? Page item names, interactive filters, whatever. There is a very nice API, and that's recommended to be used. If you have to build a URL, use this API. You pass application ID, page ID, and so on, and it builds that F*P thing for you, including checksums. Yeah, that's what it looks. Boom. Another task when upgrading Apex, go to your shared components, themes, theme, and look at things here.
Da. Ok, nu pot să vorbesc. Sun eu înapoi.
Your applications do not automatically inherit those changes. So if you upgrade to a new Apex version,
Bun, pa, pa.
go there, either hit refresh or take the safe route and click verify. It will show you, hey, those templates in that theme have changed. And you can then simply say, oh, that's good, looks good. Please give me all the latest and greatest. Did you know that beautiful page designer you can also customize? You could get rid of the unnecessary middle part and have a 2-column layout only. You can also drag and drop those tabs from here to there and make it your own app in there, right? Ooh, yeah. Oracle Apex, who's on Twitter? You don't have to be active on Twitter, but you can simply consume if you go to that URL, twitter.com #OracleApex, and just see tweets from the latest news of the Apex community. You can also ask questions, and sometimes you get answers in minutes, right? Just don't misuse it. Oh, yeah. The rule of thumb, page load and Ajax calls don't go well together, which means you have dynamic actions defined on your page, okay? And some of those dynamic actions might have set the attribute, what's it called, fire on initialization. That actually means the page loads, it's being sent to the browser renders the page, and then fires the page load event. So now an Ajax call is going back to the database, doing your dynamic action stuff, and going back to the browser again. That's just unnecessary. That's all it is. If you need something at page load, use a before header process. So that goes for executable SQL code, refresh or set value using some SQL. That should not be run on page load or fire on initialization. It can lead to really ugly things and to slow pages on load, basically. Okay. Yeah. Well done. So, classic report templates. That's the wrong name, classic report. It sounds old and outdated, but it's not. It's a different type of report. And although it doesn't have like great features like the interactive report, it supports report templates. So instead of your ugly list here, the report could look like that. Or like big cards or timeline thingos. It's still a classic report, you apply a different template. Awesome stuff. You could also write your own templates if you want. I mean, what's more beautiful than that? If you don't require this. Then it works. The advisor, always good, should be part of your development process. Application utilities, advisor, it runs some standard checks and gives you then a list of, hey, I found those issues in your application. This one can actually detect if you use a page item somewhere that doesn't exist. There are some checks that are not so necessary, others are more important. Go through the list, make sure that your app is fine. That's good. Look at that. Look at this cursor size. You can have your input cursor spanning multiple lines, and now if I hit the space bar or a key, it will insert it on all the lines. I know it's tiny features, but it's nice. And simply by holding the Alt key and then drag your mouse, and there you go. Cloning sessions. That's actually the only special request keyword that there is. If you use Apex clone session in your URL when you open a new page, then Apex internally clones the session. So that's the solution for, hey, I need to open the same page 3 times. And usually, the first page, so you open page 1 at first, and then you want to, which shows some customer details. Then you want to page 1 in another tab a second time with different customer details. The problem up to now was that this opening the second time thing was overriding session state from the first page. So you are in a big mix-up thing, and when you then change values and save something, then it's probably stored at the wrong customer. So the only solution there is, if you opening the second tab has the Apex clone session request keyword, and then Apex copies your session, then you have 2 things that are not overwriting each other. It kind of looks like that. this works only if this instance parameter is enabled, which by default is not. And there is no UI setting. You have to do it with this script. Karsten's topic. There's that awesome new Apex data parser API. Look at it, use it. It makes your life so much easier. You can do stuff like, hey, select stuff from, and forget the flow thing here that should read Apex data parser. This one gets a blob and can parse it. It could be CSV, it could be native Excel, it could be JSON, and then you can actually query that stuff in a couple lines. It has some more functions, and Karsten can do a whole talk about that. Anyway, look into this thing. There are very good examples, very interesting stuff. Final tip. Sometimes the goodies are hidden somewhere in Apex. There are actually somewhere some reports hidden which give you an overview of like all your applications in your workspace. Look through the stuff. There's, lists all the apps, gives you an overview of, hey, how many pages and regions are in there. Special setting, you could, change build option status and stuff like that. Just something for you as a homework. Look at that stuff. That's good. All right. Some links at the end. Don't forget to come to Maribor, the Admin conference. Thank you for your patience and enjoy your break.
Thank you.